Yep. Hello. Welcome to all of you, those in here in Barcelona at the Design Hub here in Barcelona, and those that are through the Arts Electronica website. So we are glad to have this talk here, both online and on-site here in Barcelona. And after so many months hidden in our houses after this global pandemic that is struggling throughout the world. No? So, and this is one of the reasons why the Ars Electronica right now is this special edition distributed throughout the world. No? So we are happy to be this network of Ars Electronica Garden. And I am Pau Alsina. I am director of the Art and Technology program of the Open University of Catalonia, Universitat Oberta de Catalunya. And I'm part of this curatorial team of this garden. And I'm also preparing the IC edition that will be in Barcelona during next years. So in this session, we will talk about this art and science of the political ecology of disasters. No? This is in clear relationship with this global situation, and that we all experience in all the cities involved in also in this Ars Electronica garden. No? So catastrophes and vulnerability has once again brought us to the forefront of the urgency of assuming and acting against the consequences of an Anthropocene that advances inexorably. So we will explore this, all those possible futures ahead of us in this session. No? So that's why we have invited these different participants that we are also glad that you are able to come here and to be on site and also through this online website. No? So the participants of this session will be Joana Moll, Ingrid Guardiola, Andy Gracie, and Israel Rodriguez. No? And also Vanina Hoffman, that she's going to be the relator, that is going to do like a written report that we're going to publish after the session is done. No? So I'll just go ahead and then I will present Joana Moll. Joana Moll is a Barcelona and Berlin-based artist and researcher. Her work critically explores the way post-capitalist narratives affect the alphabetization of machines, humans, and ecosystems. Her main research topics include internet, materiality, surveillance, social profiling, and interfaces. Furthermore, she is the co-founder of the Critical Interface Political Research Group at Hangar, Barcelona, which is one of the also main organizers of this garden, and co-founder of the Institute of Advancement of Popular Automatisms. And she is currently visiting lecturer at the Universitat Potsdam and the Escola Superior d'Art de Vic here in Barcelona. So, Joana, could you tell us in which way internet and ecology interact between each other? Your artwork has been dealing with all these issues in some way, and if I'm right, no? So could you explain us a bit about them, about how you interrelate these two keywords?
I can.
Please.
Yes. Presentation. All right. So I think when we talk about the ecology of disaster and all this, I think I came across this paradox very recently, I mean, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, and I was quite in shock of how much we don't acknowledge this. And this is a massive paradox. It basically talks about the use of energy and about the paradox of efficiency. Like, the more efficient something is, the more demand there is on the other side, and then efficiency doesn't work, right? And this was coined already in the first industrial revolution, and it's some sort of paradox that has been ignored since then. Yeah, it basically talks about that there is no technological progress that is not going to use extra and more extra resources. And I think this is something very important to have in mind, because I think it explains quite a lot of things. So again, I mean, most of the people that know me, I'm always talking about the same things, right? But also there is a huge paradox when we talk about the internet. The internet is not a cloud. Yeah? We've been told that the internet is something that's ethereal, that it's up in the sky, that doesn't have any weight, it doesn't pollute, that it's actually nothing, it's quite divine even, right? And the reality is really far from this idea, whereas internet is underground, it's very dirty, and it consumes a lot of energy, and it's really, really messy. Yeah, those are some cables that are landing from the Atlantic Oceans to a data center in New York. And you can see that well, entropy sort of reigns here. There's people inside the internet also. I really love this picture. I will show it in the presentation because you can't really understand how the internet actually works, but I think you can get a sense of how much energy it actually needs to operate when you see like the actual infrastructure. Well, I'm going to skip this. So the internet runs on devices. Yeah? And here I'm going to also focus on all these very contradictory messages that we get from the IT giants and reality, because whereas they say that we run on 100% renewable energies, it is an impossibility because the internet is not just them and their infrastructures. Yeah, internet needs a lot of other infrastructures to operate. Devices, for example, servers, and many other things. So this is a research that was published in December 2017, which for the first time it was stated that devices were the most polluting industry in the world, yeah, before even the meat industry, housing, transportation, coffee, and aviation. Yeah, and this is something that we cannot ignore because it is quite critical. And then you start to dig a little bit into this, and okay, how can this be, why is it that way? In 2010, iPhone disclosed the way their iPhones by then were produced, and they disclosed that they had more than 10,000 different parts that came from 700 different territories and were assembled by 300 pairs of hands. So when we take a device, we are in front of something that is one of the most complex objects that we produce as a society. And on top of that, it has more than a third of all the elements that we know. So it's really, really, really sophisticated and very energy-draining objects to produce. Yeah. For example, there is something, well, they use a lot of something called rare earth elements, which is basically what allows to make technology smaller, less heavy, and much more functional. Yeah. So, well, these are some of these minerals that are part of it. And I'm going to go very fast. I generally give a 12, 13 hours workshop about this, but I'm going to just spot like a very few things that I think that are important to look at. Then there is also all this war of resources. I'm not sure, I guess some of you have known about this geological US Geological Survey Agency. It's an American agency which its main goal is to look for critical resources all over the world. Yeah, and then when you start to connect the dots, which is really not that hard, you understand, okay, so Afghanistan had one of the biggest lithium deposits in the world. Yeah, and we all know what happened in 2001 and how the US went into Afghanistan very fast. And most of us, we already forgot about this war because then we focused in Iraq straight away, right? But well, the deposits are there, not sure what's up there and what's happening there right now. But it's the same thing in Bolivia. Yeah? This has the biggest deposits of lithium. Lithium, by the way, is one of the minerals that are most crucial for the batteries of our devices. Without lithium, we wouldn't have the batteries that we have now, and therefore we wouldn't have all this mobile network society that we all talk about. Yeah? I'm not sure if you're aware of what happened in Bolivia. There was supposedly a coup d'etat last year, but things are very hidden behind the smoke screen. And I think when this happens, there is something that is really happening there, much more than we acknowledge. And well, I think it's really interesting to understand what's going to happen there right now and the next years because of this mineral. And this is Bayanovo. This is the biggest mine of rare earth minerals in the world. It had, in 2014, at least 70% of the world reserves. This is a place that it's very hard to access. These pictures was taken by a British collective called Unknown Fields. But they sneaked in somehow. They managed to get through the desert and take this picture. And this is one of the very few pictures that exist about this mine. So all these places, even though that geopolitically they are crucial to our society, are very hidden and nobody really knows what's happening there. And I'm not going to start talking about trading of minerals because it's like a really black void. Nobody really understands what's going on there. Actually, as just a small note, Philips tried to disclose their supply chain. It took them more than 2 years, and they couldn't find out everything. So if somebody with the amount of resources like Philips cannot really understand all the supply chain of their products, we are completely done. I mean, we are just prone to disaster. That's where we are going. I think that the Congo case has been much more widely reported in the news. So also there is cobalt, which is also crucial to our devices. And there is a lot of slavery work, like people displaced, and all kind of very, very horrible things going on there. And then there is all the refining process of all these minerals, which is really, really radioactive. There is tons of radioactive waste derived from just cleaning up the minerals, let's say, to have like this raw material that it's going to go into our devices. This is a crazy picture. It's also from Unknown Fields. This is the adjacent lake of this refinery, which is very close to Bayanovo. And it's just a lake of radioactive waste. Sorry, it's a hard word to pronounce. This is, actually it was an exhibition by Ars Electronica I went into Berlin, and this collective just took a little bit of this radioactive waste that was laying in that lake, and they built 3 bases. One equaled, the big one, the amount of waste to build a battery, a car battery, the other one a laptop, and the other one a smartphone. I went through the exhibition, and the small one was something like that, probably. So they're actually quite big. Yeah, and this is just for one object. So then it's not just like the tangible devices that waste a lot of energy during the production and operating phase. Right? But it's also data, because we tend to think about data as something that doesn't exist, something that is just not there. And when I started to research all this, I think it was about 2013, which it's not really long ago. And even myself, I didn't understand that this was connected. And once you just wonder about it, you just realize, of course, this is not coming for free. This has to come from somewhere, right? So I was really, really worried that this equation wasn't really embedded in the social imagination. So I started to research a little bit, and I didn't find much papers that had proper numbers. And even this is really important. I saw somebody taking pictures here. This is an estimation. This is a number I got from a paper in the University of Berkeley that was published in 2008 that was trying to calculate the amount of energy waste of online advertising. So they came up with this number, but it was in a very precise network with very precise servers, et cetera, et cetera. So what I also found out that it's really hard, or it's basically an impossibility to have like an exact number of emissions in the internet. Because the internet is probably the biggest infrastructure that we ever built, and yet it's really invisible, and it's highly, highly complex, and it's impossible to understand the impact of the ecosystems. And I think this is really problematic, right? Because the internet is very at the core of economic development, social development, and you name it, right? It's really crucial to society as we are. And it's uncontrollable completely in terms of ecology and environmental impact. And this is also a really nice project that exemplifies this. There is not a lot of artists that have been working directly on the relationship between data and materiality, but Michael Saub did it. He's a German artist. In 2009, he did this project. And this is the amount of coal needed to burn 1 million views of the trailer of Avatar in YouTube. Yeah? So the electricity needed to serve this video, this trailer 1 million times, equal to all this amount of coal burned. And I think that you can relate to this much more than to numbers. And I think it's very important to keep all those things in mind. Yeah. And there is something that's even more worrying, because this is an estimation, but through 3G and 4G networks, as a user, we used to do or generate 2 gigabytes a month. But with the implementation of 5G, this is going to grow until 30 gigabytes per month. And this is massive, and I'm really not sure how the Earth is going to respond to that. Yeah. Again, this is like the crazy amount of data that we're going to produce in the following years. Like, it will take more than 5 million years to watch the amount of video that will cross global IP networks every month this year. And there is something that yet, as I said, the internet is expansive, but we just communicate with it through interfaces. We really don't have access to the infrastructure and all this algorithmic workforce that work beyond the interface. Yeah? And this is a project by ShareLab that the only thing that we can see here is on the left side, it's the interface. And these all these algorithmic processes that basically organize and deal with our data. Yeah, this has a massive environmental impact, but we cannot see it, and we are not connected with it, therefore it doesn't exist, right? But it is there. This is a project I released last year, which I tried to calculate the amount of energy needed to load or to effectuate a simple purchase of a book at an Amazon website. And I came up with just 12 interfaces, but the amount of code which I printed, it was almost 9,000 pages of written code. Yeah? So there is all this disparity about what we see and about what we don't see, yeah? Which I think we need to have it very present for obvious reasons, as I already explained. And it's not just that, it's also all these infrastructures like the data centers, the massive data pantries that occupy vast amount of land. Yeah, like a typical data center can go up to, I can't pronounce this, 165,000 square meters, which is equivalent to 24 soccer pitches. Also, for example, Amazon, in terms of materiality, they have more than 100 million square meters all over the world just to operate their business, basically, and this is massive, yeah. And also there is, I think this is brilliant because it's so stupid. So there is like these engineers at Microsoft that they had a problem to solve, which basically it's how we're gonna cool down our servers in a very sustainable way. And somebody said, okay, why don't we put them underwater? And even the slogan was, well, 50% of the population of the world live on the shores. Why shouldn't our data do that as well? Well, I'm not sure I need to answer this, but if you put a server that's very hot underwater, you're going to obviously make the underwater very, very hot, right? But there is nothing about this in the page of the project whatsoever. They have these live webcams where they show like these mammals and fishes just going very or cohabitating with the servers in a very peaceful and nice way. I'm serious, you can go, it's in the internet, it's Natic project, yeah? Microsoft. I'm gonna skip that because I guess I ran out of time, Pau. Well, this is just, I need to mention this. So this is Jeff Bezos opening like a renewable project for Amazon. And this is another advertising where Amazon announced that he's working with heavily with fossil fuel industry. Yeah, so it's like all these paradoxes that they are just intertwined together constantly. And this is not just about Amazon, it's also about Microsoft, it's also about Google. They also partner up with very, very big fossil fuel companies. And at the same time, this is Bill Gates was the founder of this initiative, which they promote projects that work with renewable energies, but at the same time, well, they also are funding this. Google founded some of these think tanks, the climate change deniers, and so on. And then we cannot forget this. These are the engineers behind this amazing, fantastic undersea server, underwater server. And this is the group. When we talk about techno-patriarchy, this explains it. Yeah, those are most of the guys that are designing, or the group, social group context that are designing these technologies. Yeah, and it's basically men, they are white, they are between 30s, 50s, 40s, I don't know, probably between Catholic and Jewish, and they are mostly Anglo-Saxon. And we cannot take this out of sight, because this is really important. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it at that. Sorry, I overextended a bit.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot, Joanna, for your talk and your insights into this urgent question right now. And now we're going to move on to Ingrid Guardiola. In Guardiola, she is teacher, audiovisual programmer, director, and essayist, writer. Director and writer. She has contributed from all these perspectives to public debate and televised formats and the role of images and technological devices in today's world. She was director of the Soy Camera project, one great project that was made of a laboratory for new visual formats produced by the CCCB, the Contemporary Culture Center of Barcelona. And she is also director of the Barcelona Sample of Quality Television, Miniput.
Not now.
Not now, no, but she was director. She was director of that. She has taught in several Catalan universities, where she has also carried out research into questions related with gender, inequality, and technology in the framework of the audiovisual culture and practice. No? She, a couple of years ago, she published the essay L'ull i la navalla, the eye and the knife, let's say it this way, in which she analyzes how images condition our private life and determine the dynamics of the public sphere and communities. No? So I would like to ask you some questions, because you have been recently thinking about what you call the myth of the abundance, no? As Joanna was also explaining in some way, all these numbers that she was showing us, no? In relation with the imaginary of disaster that we are living now. So please tell us a little bit about what is this myth of abundance that we are all living in.
Okay, thank you very much, Pau. And Ingrid Guardiola doesn't speak very well English, so sorry for that. When I was a child, I didn't go to a summer camp, so I'm going to try to do my best, and I'm going to read. So, and of course, I've bring with me some images. We are going to see a lot of images. Well, not a lot, because there's only 12 minutes, so we are going to continue. I have structured this brief talk in 3 points. The first is the myth of abundance in Hollywood films. The second one is how social networks is just picking up all these imaginary and myths of abundance. And in the third place, the new Prometheus and the patriarchal techno-utopism that it's very well reflected in the picture that Joanna has shown. So let's start with Hollywood, and also let's start with capitalism. As the anarchist anthropologist David Graeber, who died last week, said, perhaps capitalism died in the 80s, and now we are facing something else. In 2008, one academic paper coined a new approach to capitalism, speaking of necrocapitalism. That means contemporary forms of organizational accumulation that involve dispossession and the subjugation of life to the power of death. David Harvey would call it accumulation by dispossession. Hollywood and private television have been 2 essential tools to create the necessary myths based on exploitation and destruction. They have created too much myths that we are very used to this image. The image that Joanna has shown us, it seems like the science fiction films that we see in every screen. So in the 60s, Susan Sontag said that being a spectator of calamities taking place in another country is the quintessential modern experience. So Sontag it was just announcing what nowadays it's just our daily bread. So now words are also images and sounds at home. These are our homes. Of course, images are the main tools, or a very important tools of the capitalist project. They are the new skin, or the skin of the new flesh, so we have to take them very seriously. As Mark Fisher pointed out, public space is abandoned, given over to uncollected garbage and stalking animals. Neoliberals, the capitalist realists par excellence, have celebrated the destruction of public space. Capitalism is what is left when beliefs have collapsed at the level of ritual or symbolic elaboration, and all that is left is the consumer spectator trudging through the ruins and the relics, no? Trudging through the ruins and the relics. This turn from belief to aesthetics, from engagement to spectatorship, is held to be one of the virtues of capitalist realism. This is very important. In this way, science fiction films and catastrophe films immunize us against the evidence of the extinction of the world. They metabolize our anxiety through aesthetics. After the 2008 global crisis, Hollywood articulated this aesthetic narrative and emotional stories. Images of the planetary collapse, Detroitism, ruin porn, all these kind of images. Films to delve into the Anthropocene, but only as a fiction. So we have here three examples of the world just collapsing. Here we have the inert megacities of Blade Runner or Ghost in the Shell. We have the bunker wall of World War Z, Cosmopolis, Last Days on Earth, Passengers or Oblivion. The suburban miserable settlements of Elysium, District 9 or Ready Player One. A wall of climate refugees of Interstellar, Mad Max, Snowpiercer, or The Road. These are just a very few examples of this last decade in Hollywood. The ruin is a dialectical image. It concentrates what historically and collectively has to be assured, but Hollywood has depoliticized the ruins. Hollywood movies do not ask themselves what to do with the waste after the great consumption party and after the great theater of war, but how to do what is necessary to continue as we were and keep family, social, and economic structures intact. Post-produced ruins are just as beautiful as historical ruins. The landscape of devastation is still a landscape, said Susan Sontag. Already in the 60s, Sontag wrote that science fiction's film deal with catastrophe, one of the oldest themes in art, and that they use the images of destruction as their main theme, and that they can be described as popular mythology for the contemporary negative imagination of the impersonal. And this impersonal can be the servers, no? these fictional corporations included in this kind of films, Ghost of the Shell again, Blade Runner, Elysium, Hunger Games. There is also an evil corporation that is gonna explode the planet Earth. No? And of course, they make us believe that the new government made of experts, military, and a white male hero who sacrificed himself will save the world to return to its original abundancy and peace. Hollywood has created the myth of a world that can reborn locally, only locally, from the ashes, thanks to these new unborn Prometheus like Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, or Matthew McConaughey, nostalgic heroes whose memory of the happy home will serve them as a perpetuum mobile for guaranteeing the future of humanity. They are the new Mad Men who, unlike Mad Men, preach good heart. But like Mad Men, all they want is to try to save their family in a post-civilizational world. The main untold plot of these stories, the inner ritual, is how to go beyond an unhealthy, limited, precarious, and restricted situation to a new situation, a resurrection of civilization based on the very traditional myth of abundance of natural and artificial resources. That means how to transform a disciplinary society organized around the enclosed spaces of the factory, the school, the prison, the homes, and the ruins, into a controlled society in which, as Mark Fisher said, all institutions are embedded in a dispersed corporation under the figure of a debtor addict. We can say that the disciplinary societies use limits and restrictions, and the controlled societies play with the myth of abundance through smoothie structures like social networks. So I'm going to take this second part very short. It's because it's very clear that social networks that Hollywood has found its best ally in platform capitalism, in social networks, but of course this abundance, it's only a pragmatic fantasy, a mirage. And a mirage that we can, that it's rooted in a very, in some cultural tradition. Let's think about Lewis Mumford when in The Myth of the Machine said that the attraction that the immense supermarkets exert on the people may be due to the fact that they are the mechanized reproduction of primitive Eden, the primitive paradise. He also argues that the primitive man was a great taxonomist and a great collector. whose ability to describe and differentiate elements of the environment was due to that capacity of collecting things, not only food, but a lot of kind of things. And that this accumulation developed his intelligence. So now we delegate this collecting process to the machines, to the algorithms. So we are living in a smart world, and we are becoming more dumb because we are delegating this collecting process to the machines. These are spaces for the cornucopia, for the abundance. We collect a lot of friends, likes, shares, a lot of gratification. But this is only an illusion. I have summarized these 5 reasons why this abundance is an illusion. So it's, first of all, because the data-driven capitalism collects information only to process this data. All you accumulate is all what you're going to lose. Secondly, because these platforms are connected sites based on social metrics, algorithms, and computer protocols, like in a Skinner box. Third, due to its algorithmic architecture, you see in a leading position what is sponsored or successful. Fourth, the paradox of choice, if you can, described by Svars, that explain that in a framework with many alternatives and an environment of abundant choices, this makes that the human being will be less satisfied with the decisions he makes. And finally, the one that has explained very well Joanna, the temporal and material boundaries of internet. So these are not idins. But they didn't also had his limitations, his walls, his prophylactic zone. But the wall couldn't protect paradise from the catastrophe. And now I'm going to pass to the third point. Well, sorry, this is just Athanasius Kircher, the description of paradise. And he remembers us that in the original version of paradise, in the Persian version, walls were very necessary to describe paradise, to protect the people that live on paradise from the violence of the wall. So social networks promise us that they will protect from the violence of the wall through the algorithmic care, we can say like that. And the third point is how this, as social networks can't avoid the exception status and extinction of the wall, so Hollywood has invented new myths, new salvation myths. No? The pandemic of the COVID has normalized the exception status and the limits and protocols of isolated homes. The home has become a safety place, but it's far from being considered a paradise, an abundant place. It's the result of a disciplinary situation, a very stressed and problematic place. It's not home sweet home, but home bitter home, because we are we are locked in these houses. A lot of films remember us that we live in a very limited and sterile wall in front of what Ray Brassier calls the truth of extinction, like The Road, Interstellar, Children of Men, or The Handmaid's Tale. The wall they describe is a wall without homes, where citizens are permanent refugees. The fourth picture is of the Moira refugee camp that has burned this night, affecting 3,000 people. It's indistinguishable of the other frames, of the other fictional frames. So we are not surprised when we see these kind of pictures, because our unconscious is overwhelmed with other similar pictures. So just to conclude, in front of this extinction situation, there has been two kinds of reactions that Rosi Braidotti synthesized very well. In one hand, we have the panic about the future of the human, and on the other, the excitement about being able to become more than human. Not this kind of answers to this situation. The first one is the nihilistic hedonism, the fetishist disavowal described by Mark Fisher, that we can resume with, I try not to think about it, or we all knew it, but still we kept doing the same, or it's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. And the second one It's the patriarchal techno-utopism described by Joanna that tries to invest in high-tech like artificial intelligence or artificial colonies outer space, like Elon Musk or the Jeff Bezos project, inspired also by science fiction. Jeff Bezos wants to build these colonies through the O'Neill cylinders that are part of our science fictional films. No? Yes, and I'm finishing. Interstellar or Elysium use these O'Neill cylinders described by a physician in the 70s, and he wants to put in practice. So, versus the apocalyptic fetishism and all this new Prometheus, very well accompanied by other films like these ones, a very brave man trying to conquest new worlds, to find new lands of abundance. We have this very strange, also, of course, Hollywood movie. So we are in the imaginary of Hollywood, we are still in this imaginary. But I will oppose this patriarchal techno-utopism to this proposal. In front of the Homo Destructor, we can find the Mulier Restituor. Abundance was, the film told us that abundance was not where you were looking at, in your past or in your future. It was in your renegotiated present. A very wise, strong, empathetic, and freak women that prioritize community freedom to false abundance replace the madmen with their sterile, irrational, and unfair ways of organizing the end of the world. When we read the poster that the future belongs to the mad, and this is the last diapo, we should read it not in the traditional way and in the advertising, well, be mad by our product, but in this way. In the way that, in the way pointed out by Mark Fisher when he said that depressive and all the massive mental, all the people who have suffered massive mental damage under capitalism, the Fordist robots, etc., that they will protagonize the next revolutionary class. They really do have nothing to lose. So Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, and Matthew McConaughey have too much to lose with their bourgeois memories and epic colonization, but most part of the people don't. So how should be our particular fury and careful road? We don't really know.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ingrid. Well, this relationship between home and catastrophes and this myth of abundance and also this myth of survival, no? Of defending against the outer world. It's really right now things like we are living right now in this not just in Hollywood but in our real normal life. No? So it really connects with what Joanna has just said, and also with what Andy is going to talk about, because there is this connection with this fetishism of the catastrophes that also you also connected. No? No? You are not going to use it. Okay, so thanks a lot. Andy Gracie is going to talk then. He's a British artist based in Barcelona. In his work, examines the opportunities that other disciplines offer to creative practice, such as biology, astronomy, or robotics. No? In his works, he uses different media that come from installations where sound, video, etc., by art conjugated as a language of its own. No? The whole of his work is situated between art and science, generating situations of interaction and exchange between emergent systems and behaviors. In his recent works, he examines the cultural impact of space research, as you were mentioning also, space research and the science of astrobiology, that maybe you're going to talk about later. No? His work has been exhibited in many places and also festivals, and also has been awarded by some prizes. Also Ars Electronica, honorary mention in 2007 and 2015, I guess. No? So please, Andy, we know you have been recently dealing with the apocalypses and also with the fetishism of catastrophes. That's something you've been working right now. No? And this is something you have been working lately, and that connects with some of the current ongoing crisis. So tell us, please, about this connection that you have been working and how do you deal in your art practice.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I am going to talk about fetishism of disaster. I was just telling Ingrid that I didn't need the clicker thing. I have this video, which I'll comment on later. Yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation, Ingrid, and I think some of the things I'm going to say will resonate with that from a different perspective. So I had very little time to prepare this, so I'm really hoping this isn't going to be an example of a disaster and I can actually engage with different perspectives of disaster. But I'm going to start by telling you a short story, describe a thing that happened when I was a kid. That I used to have, when I was a kid, from the ages of about 5 to 9 years old, I used to have a vision, and it wasn't a dream. It was like a fever dream. It was a waking vision. It was this thing that would just appear and consume my very being for a few very kind of lucid moments, and it would come regularly and unannounced, unexpectedly. And the vision was these two massively heavy, massively enormous metal spheres. And they were joined together by a thread that was like a human hair, really fine thread. And they were really slowly trying to move apart. And if this thread were to break, it would unleash the most horrific catastrophes across the world and the universe. It would be the end of everything. And recently it started coming back. And it kind of feels like, in many ways, it feels like this thread is as close to breaking as it ever was. And so the recurrence of me engaging and kind of trying to deal with this thing that haunts me is to develop a series of works which are called the Haunting Series, where these the sensations which are generated by this vision inform a series of works which kind of deal with how we interiorize and deal with the notion of disaster, which is becoming more of an ever-present in our lives, less and less of an abstract concept, and more of something that we realize we may have to live with to some degree. So my interests in this series are about, it's kind of the aesthetics of disaster and how we prepare for disaster, and how they're bound up in a form of wishfulness or even kind of fetishism. And this extends into how we're interested, how we engage with disaster as a kind of hyper-object, and how we accept it into our lives as a cultural and social phenomenon, and the ways which prepare for it and even rehearse for it. A kind of a local and global anxiety versus a politicized kind of denialism. In the background is a series of video stills of a project I'm developing now, which are exploring the aesthetics of disaster and the concept of existential threat, which is called Catastrophe Jangled Hideously Out of Process, where I'm training an artificial intelligence system, a machine learning system, to generate its own kind of scenarios of disaster. The irony being the artificial intelligence itself is one of the many objects which is considered as an existential threat in its own right. I'm also developing a longer-term project in residency with the Institute of Cosmic Sciences, the University of Barcelona, called The Ends of Everything, which is about the end of the universe itself. You know, we talk about these different apocalypses and our survival strategies, our preparatory strategies, where we have to assume that there are apocalypses coming from which there is no escape. There is a finality to everything. We have these kind of long-term, unavoidable apocalypses, which we have to compare with the midterm unavoidable, and then we have these near-term kind of maybe avoidable apocalypses. But the apocalypse, the ends of everything, the catastrophe, is embedded within the very fact of our existence. So a crucially important caveat of these things that we're talking about, I think, is that we have to bear in mind that for the majority of us in our privileged positions in a protected part of the developed world, this is something new. This kind of rising intensity and urgency of the climate crisis, combined with a rise in bizarre right-wing popularity politics, combined with the collapse of the notion of truth, combined with a pandemic which we fear may only be the first of many, is exposing many of us for the first time to an uncertainty and precariousness which has been the norm for a great many of the inhabitants of the world. Which is one of the things that allows us to engage with this great phase of nihilistic hedonism, which you mentioned, which I think encapsulates so many great ideas about this. So that we find aesthetic delight in natural disasters is kind of puzzling. Why do we sometimes delight in natural disasters? And is it morally appropriate to do so? How do we express that aesthetic delight? So in this really brief introduction, which I've done half of already without even starting, I'm going to mention two of the forms that how we do that, and it might shed light on the attraction. One is through culture, the visual arts, cinema, literature, and so on, and the other is through a thing called pre-enactment. And maybe we'll see that the drives and outcomes of these engagements could actually be quite hard to separate, which hints at something much deeper. So it goes without saying that disaster is a spectacle, and the global purveyors of information know that. The news and images from disasters feed the contemporary catastrophe awareness on a daily basis. The competitive need for attention forces media to distort, break down, and pull apart disaster scenarios in order to provoke the sensational. In typical cases of event journalism, their job is to make way too much out of a little something. An integral part of our current visual and verbal language does consist of risk messages, health and safety risk assessments, hazard tapes, warning signals, business plans with risky outcomes, fire drills, unexpected diseases challenging the health of entire continents, plant and animal species, and even entire archipelagos at risk of disappearance. This barrage of catastrophe, fear, and anxiety can produce the psychological phenomenon known as a collapse of compassion and compassion fatigue. A loss of emotional connection with disaster can perversely and paradoxically coincide with the desire to see more of the same. Kant was among the first ones to highlight that disasters provide both aesthetic pleasure and displeasure, depending on whether we have some safe distance from the natural disaster or not. In the first case, we experience the awe-inspiring version, while in the second case, we truly realize that we are physically powerless in the face of disaster. He made the connections between these emotions and the sublime, that which is at once beautiful and terrifying. Dacia Keltner and Jonathan Hyde in 2003, in a 2003 study, began to expand on this approach to war as a perceived vastness and a need for accommodation. They defined the feeling of awe in the face of hyper-objects such as disaster as an inability to assimilate and experience into current mental structures. They concluded that awe can produce and inform related states such as admiration, elevation, and the epiphanic experience. The representations of disaster in culture have been varied, from blockbusters such as 2012, Armageddon and San Andreas, and 1,000 zombie movies where the strong, invulnerable hero comes to do battle on behalf of good and against evil, the Prometheus that Ingrid was talking about. Again and again, one detects the hunger for a good war, which poses no moral problems and admits of no moral qualifications. One of the main themes is this United Nations fantasy, a fantasy of united warfare. A great enough disaster cancels all enmities and calls upon the utmost concentration of Earth resources. We also see examples where despair is not allayed and the hero is powerless or just absent, such as the terminally depressing but compulsive 1980s nuclear war film Threads. In the visual arts, we can compare old masterly paintings of the erupting Vesuvius, the aftermath of citywide infernos and the wrecking of ships, where the awe of nature and the accident is palpable, to more complex recent treatments, such as maybe Simon Faithfull's reenactment for a future scenario 2012, where we see the adrenaline-charged rehearsals of an airport fire crew rehearsing on these kind of mock-up airplane fires, where the adrenaline fades into tedium once the disaster is averted. And then there's the Japanese Okin Collective's Operation for Something Black and Hot, also from 2012, which was a training film made in the aftermath of the Fukushima tsunami. Meanwhile, we have another postmodern theatre which grows out of an increasing awareness of the inevitability of crisis and disaster, a phenomenon that Francesca Laura Carvalho calls pre-enactment, a form of identifying the way supposedly forthcoming dangers are performed before they happen. She points out how dramatized instances relate to performance, reenactment and simulation, and underline how their structure is very similar to that of theatre. In these scenarios and those of other cultural manifestations of disaster, we are empirically experiencing without despair the fact that there are forces we cannot control. Examples of pre-enactments can include school shooting drills, evacuation procedures, rehearsed earthquake and tsunami protection protocols, all disasters that we expect to come. The photographer Nina Berman wrote that simulation drills are like state-sponsored performance art, where realism is replaced by theatre. There's actually an increase in this state-sponsored large-scale disaster theatre. From the World Bank's September 2017 pandemic simulation held during their annual meeting in Washington, which is not the kind of event that people would typically associate with the World Bank, but it's one of the many exercises the bank has helped to organize, reflecting what experts say is the growing awareness outside of the traditional global health sector of the increasing threat and economic disruption posed by a global pandemic. The B612 Foundation is, according to their own website, an organization that works towards protecting the Earth from asteroid impacts and informing and forwarding worldwide decision-making on planetary defense issues. The B612 provides a non-governmental voice on the risks, options, and implications of asteroid data while advancing the technical means by which that data is acquired. They also organize regular large-scale theatrical performances of how to react to and survive an asteroid impact with the Earth. Meanwhile, the Future of Humanity Institute at the University of Oxford, led by existential threat guru Nick Bostrom, and the Centre for Study of Existential Risk at the University of Cambridge are working on what they term the pre-paradigm environment. In other words, a cultural and socio-political preparation for that coming change in paradigm. I think that much of the fascination and fetishism of consuming images of disaster comes from two perspectives. One is that, as Susan Sontag so astutely observed, we are rarely inside anyone else's feelings. It's all external. Another is the seduction of seeing the normal turned upside down, the normal made weird, the known landscapes and signifiers being turned into something shockingly new, the ability to fantasize about how we would explore and survive this new reality. It's the new anti-mundane. As we Europeans, or ex-Europeans, and being another crisis, move inexorably towards joining the developed world, Hurricane Ali and wildfire country in regularly tasting disaster. We can probably find out quite soon what will change for disaster enthusiasts and fetishists and for disaster artists that are exploring this paradigm.
Okay. Yes.
I'm done.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Of course, your talk, your ideas were highly connected with both of the talks. I mean, this is great, and I'm sure that it will be connected with what Israel is going to talk about, because sometimes I'll tell he's a disaster specialist, let's say disaster man. Sometimes I call him disaster man because right now this is one of your areas of specialization. Yes. Israel is and thank you for your talk, Andy. Israel is currently full research professor at the IN3, the Internet Interdisciplinary Institute of the Open University of Catalonia. That is easy. And his field of research is the so-called STS, the Science Technology Studies. So he's a social scientist, let's say. And the study of new forms of technical democracy, social experimentation, public debate and mobilization, and also particularly interested in understanding the role of technoscience in new health and social care activism, and in public engagement and participation in disaster situations. So you're going to talk from this perspective that in some way is highly connected with all that we have been dealing in this talk, no? This political ecology of disasters. No? He is the coordinator of the CareNet research group and has been visiting research at many universities, as the Longbourn University, the Centre for the Study of Invention and Social Process of Goldsmiths College London, or Instituto de Sociología Pontificia de la Universidad Católica de Chile. In 2014, he received the Amsterdamska Award for the European Association for the Study of Science and Technology for the book Disasters and Politics, Materials, Experiments and Preparedness, that you co-edited with Manuel Tironi and Michael Guggenheim. So, Israel, from your perspective as a social scientist, and a specialist in the study of disasters. We have just seen. Could you share with us some of the things that you have learned about disasters through your life of studying these particular events?
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Pau, for this long introduction. To answer your question, I'm gonna take you to Puchuncaví. Puchuncaví is a small town, 150 kilometers from Santiago de Chile. It's the home of largest copper smelting plant and other 14 petrochemical complexes. For the past 5 decades, neighbors of Puchuncaví have lived with excessive levels of toxic chemicals, arsenic, PTEX, different types of sulfurs. The cloud, as neighbors call it, envelops their daily life. Harmful industrial chemicals sediment in their lungs and on the bodies of their loved ones, on their water wells, animal companions, and plants, as Pedro is showing us in this picture. The harm is so severe and ubiquitous that suffering has become a normalized feature of daily life. Not a spectacular disruption lived in the excitement of the eventful, but a chronic, silent, and creeping condition that is inseparable from everyday life. Once a quiet location, Puchuncaví has become a sacrifice zone, as they call it, a permanently impaired, impoverished, and isolated community in the name of progress and national economic development. Over the last years, mainly together with my colleague and friend Manuel Tironi, my research has revolved around how citizens and communities like this cope with and resist to slower forms of disaster. The expression slow disaster is not new. Building upon Nixon's idea of slow violence, the historian Scott Knowles uses the expression to frame disasters not as a specific terrifying events demanding immediate response, but rather as long processes of environmental degradation and deferred maintenance on technological systems. Actually, as anthropologist Kim Fortune puts forward, in our time, we can see slow and fast disasters side by side. We see an increasing incidence of acute disasters, think of Fukushima or Katrina, but also of chronic and slow disasters, as it happens with a slower crisis related to the effects of radiation, waste, or pollution. But to me, the notion of slow disaster is not just a way to broaden the range of disasters to study. As I will argue, it's mainly a way of intervening conceptually and politically to the very notion of disaster. It is, above all, a way of opening up and problematizing a notion, that of disaster, which often falls short at naming processes, scales, and temporalities that define many contemporary risks, hazards, and violences. I will go back to Puchuncaví to unfold this argument a bit more. How did these communities strive to cope with systematic toxicity? After spending time with neighbors, attending meetings, and discussing with activists, we witnessed that practices of care, were a crucial element in the daily struggles of neighbors trying to cope with industrial harm in Puchuncaví. A couple of brief examples. Firstly, we attended several meetings of former workers of the smelting plant. While these meetings were arranged to discuss legal actions against the plant, they were in practice a therapeutic attempt at making bearable the afflictions faced by these poisoned ex-workers, a space to talk and share experiences, anxieties, and anecdotes, a moment of healing, self-care, and support. Actually, it was through the exchange of stories and testimonies that the green men, as they are called, reinforced their emotional ties, affinities, and identifications with each other, shaping a resilient and caring collective subject. The second form of care emerged in forms of domestic and intimate care: cleaning, repairing, mending, sheltering, healing, with which people, mostly women, coped with chronic harm. By taking care of their companions, husbands, gardens, grandchildren, people in Puchuncaví open up space for knowledge production and political speculation. The attention paid to the minute alterations affecting their loved ones, the dedication granted at healing sick people, sick relatives, help to reconstruct the trajectory of harm. As they acknowledge, the practice of care helped to join the dots. It rendered visible and palpable the suffering that expert analysis often conceal. Through care, they made connections, identified actors, and established a larger vision about causes, consequences, and liabilities. We learned from Puchuncavinos that care was extremely important to engage with lower forms of violence and harm, both as spaces of healing, awareness, and resistance, but also as an epistemic tool to make visible undervalued voices, lives, geographies. Or to put it differently, by engaging with many of these communities, we learned how important it was to question what counts as a disaster, when, how, and for whom a disaster happens. Indeed, we learned that the usual image of disasters as natural, unexpected, acute, and strident events can be a clear obstacle in terms of representation and political strategy to understand, mobilize, and act decisively in front of certain forms of harm, abandonment, or violence that occur gradually and out of sight, that are dispersed across time and space, and that frequently are hardly viewed as disasters at all. So from my work, I've learned that the very definition of disaster is extremely political. And this is one of the points I'd like to make. Not only because there is no easy agreement on what is or what is not a disaster, but because the grammar of disaster is also a way of distributing the sensible. It's a way of making certain things visible and hiding others. That's why I find slow disasters interesting to think about our present. They help us challenge our focus on disasters, slowing down our analysis, reasoning, and science, making room for critical takes about the framing of contemporary, pressing, and difficult-to-change situations, considering also other forms of expertise, representation, and even of democracy. Indeed, slow disasters help us pay a greater attentiveness to questions of visibility and invisibility, and voice or voiceless, looking not only at the cute moments, at the loudest voices, but also at more chronic and silent issues of social inequality, exclusion, abandonment, neglect. Slow disasters, thus, are disruptive, as they require a complete rethinking of the ethics, politics, and science of disasters. But what would it mean in this context to rethink, for instance, the new climate regime, sometimes framed as an emergency, as a slow disaster, or this pandemic? What does it mean to slow down a big fire, a hurricane, or a heat wave? What other voices can we hear? What processes of degradation, violence, or abandonment become visible? What forms of governance, of resistance, of healing, or repair are now possible? Again, what counts as a disaster? When, how, and for whom a disaster happens? Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Israel. The last things that you were saying, what counts as a disaster? This is one of the key questions here. And it also connects with the how to deal with disasters and the importance of this care as something that you have been studying. No? So in some way, we have been dealing with many different questions regarding the relation between the internet materiality and and ecology, how these two things, apparently not connected, are highly connected, and we need to be aware of that. Then we moved to talk about the Hollywood Imaginaries and this myth of abundance that is behind that it's not just in Hollywood, but it's in our lives, and we live through that, as we just saw the previous presentation of Joanna. And also then we moved to these connections with Andy, Grace, and this fetishism of the catastrophes, with all these images that you were constructing from this artificial intelligence machine that were generated through that. No, so it was also a way of experiencing these catastrophes and the thought that are behind that. No, so the different connections are the different talks have been dealing with these different ways of getting together this political ecology of disasters, no, through art and science projects, but also through reflections from the more theoretical part or from the social scientists. No? So this has a clear connection with the current situation, and that's why the next roundtable that I'm going to moderate, to conduct, will be about uncertainty. That is something that is behind all this way of dealing with this disaster. No? So you may have some questions between all of you. You may have some commentaries about different notions of disasters, some different notions of the concepts that are behind all those different practices, or maybe we could lead to some questions from the audience, if it's okay to you. So we will have enough time to get a couple of 2 or 3 more questions. We have enough time. We're supposed to finish at 19:25, so we've got like more than almost 10-15 minutes to answer the questions that some of you may have. If there is any question in the room right now, there are some questions in the YouTube channel also, I think. But first, I would like to see if someone here has some questions. The ones that are heroic ones that are here when outside is raining and yeah. So maybe we could move on to some of the questions from the YouTube channel.
Hey.
Hi, Irma.
Hi. Yeah,
Hi,
Leopold Zika asks, hi, how does a positive feminist utopia look like?
How does a positive feminist utopia like? Okay. Does anyone?
I can only say that it probably looks much better than a positive masculine utopia. But apart from that, I'm not sure I'm the most qualified to answer that question. I don't know.
Okay. Yes, there are some connections between. Ingrid, you mentioned Braidotti's thought that in some ways deals with this. Some of the ideas, will you?
Yes, I like the Mark Fisher considerations of the subordinate or invisible people, or the ones that are never taken in consideration. So between them, we can consider also women. Not now, perhaps, but in history of humanity, women were not taken in consideration, not in the Greek agora, for example, no? To put a very clear example. I don't like to talk about utopias because I'm very happy between ruins and problems and disasters. So as I am not a solutionist, I believe in what Reco Horvat called like an optimism without hope, something like that. And positive, I believe also in the positive effects of negative discourse. So perhaps I'm not the best person to answer this question, but I can, well, I know what he was waiting for, but I'm not the right person.
No, but that's a question. That's an answer, because there are some traps hidden between the words, let's say, and what comes after these words and the thoughts that are behind the idea of the utopia or the idea of the positive.
Yes.
Let's say.
I think that techno-utopism is also building its discourse against something. So he needs to destroy to build his discourse. So this is a very phenomenologic negative. These have a very phenomenology negative consequences. So when I see this kind of white male entrepreneurs, I see them as fighters, as destroyers. So they try to be positive, to show his positive future's hopes, but the answer it's on the contrary of what they are projecting. Of course, the feminist perspective on technology it's a very new perspective. Judy Wachman on the 80s was reflecting very much how to invert this close relation between the genre and technology. So I'm just studying this relation. Of course, we need more feminist perspective on the design of technologies, of course.
For sure.
It's evident. And I think that from a feminist point of view, the answer is not exploring the outer space like in the ancient Westerns.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, that's an answer, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Renegotiate the present.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to renegotiate the present.
For sure, for sure. Well, this idea of the techno-utopias is something that you have been also dealing, Israel, in the science technology studies. This is something that is one of the horses of were one of the main problems of things that are dealing with some way, no?
Well, I think that the question about how feminism or other critical stances could intervene in these concepts, I agree that I'm not that interested in the idea of utopia, but I'm interested in challenging the idea of disaster. And in our field, feminism is very important as a source to try to challenge that. And that's why I also was interested in talking about care and trying to understand how these concepts and perspectives and sensibilities transform the very idea of disaster, and particularly the masculine view, the male view of the concepts surrounding the definition of disaster, like risk, hazard, or the kind of response that we do in front of these situations, and the role that care plays or vulnerability plays.
For sure.
In understanding problems of security, for instance. So I think that I don't know how it would be, but I'm sure that it would be very different, and other concepts would play a more central role than the ones that we are used to grasp, to think about these topics. So, and I think it's very much needed, of course.
Yeah, for sure. We need to get out from these common grounds and common words that sometimes don't let us think about far further than that. I think there are some more questions over there. We've got 10 minutes. Yeah, so we've got some more questions.
Just as a response to that idea, I think it kind of plugs in somehow. I was just kind of looking at the title of the talk. We're talking about an ecology of disasters, and I'm wondering how we can consider what an ecology of disasters is, and kind of looking kind of historically that the history of humanity is a history of disasters, from collapses of first civilizations through internal means or external influences or from natural disasters. We look at kind of collapses of populations in Polynesia. We'll look at the collapse of the Native American civilizations through external influence, invasion, the Australian Aborigines, etc., etc. The people who were buried in Pompeii. This series of disaster has affected human history. So in some ways is like this, do we consider that disaster is the default state? And that I was talking about disaster on this big spectacular scale, that there's something that is coming, but the fact that we are all kind of living disaster in various degrees, and that there is maybe an interdependence, a cause and effect of these disasters, which we could term an ecology. And that, I'm no expert in this, but I would put some kind of money betting that the vast majority of this ecology of disaster, this kind of default state of disaster of humanity, is kind of male-driven, right? So thinking about the
and militaristic, if I may. And militaristic.
Yeah.
It's not only male; it's a particular version of that.
Yeah, precisely. So yeah, that was a kind of a reflection, those points to maybe feed into the conversation.
And Israel asked the question, what we can consider a disaster. This is a very key question because we are in the middle of a pandemic, and this protocol is a disaster. So this social distance, this quietness, this pressure of the limitation of every aspect of life, it's a disaster. It's not. We have not used to this visual rhetoric of the disaster, but it's a disaster, of course.
Yeah, I think we have a couple of questions more. Yes? Another web question?
Yeah, there is another question. Pierre Bourdin asks, could technology save us from the disaster? Or is it the contrary? How art can help with that?
How can what?
How can art help?
How can art help with that?
Well, I can answer this. No, there's no way. There's no way it can do this. No way.
There's no way.
It's we can start for what I discussed here, right? Like technological development, it just increasingly uses more natural resources, and the more technological development we have, the more natural resources it's going to happen. Even like the renewables, it's a huge paradox, because to just build the technology that will be able to generate renewables at large needs a lot of natural resources, which in turn are going to run in old fossil fuel industry. So it's just like one layer after one layer after one layer, and I think that's like this very, again, techno-patriarchy utopia in the future. Like, let's fix things, in top, and this and that, instead of really looking at a holistic way of how things are related and how things really work, actually, and just not try to fix things, but what Ingrid said, just negotiate with the present and with the things that we have now, not try to implement just like another layer of things. And
to complement this, the other day I saw the Neuralink's presentation of this kind of device, Elon Musk device, just to put on the brain, and he talked about that in face of electronic problems, electronic solutions, but depression, anxiety are not electronic problems, are problems. We have to understand the context of these problems. So this is this kind of thinking.
And then I also think there is like a critical thing, which all these solutions tend to be very reductionist and tend to obfuscate complexity. And without understanding and apprehending and embracing complexity, there is nothing that we can even start negotiating, let alone fix it, which I think is a really bad word. But
yeah, I agree completely with what you're both saying. I think the idea of kind of the technological fix, the technological utopianism, is probably one of the most dangerous concepts that we have right now. This kind of false security that it's okay, technology will save us. If it's not Jeff Bezos or it's not Elon Musk, it's the next generation that there will come, that humans will develop the savior technology. Assuming that the way things change has some kind of permanence, or at least some slow state, that things will remain the same long enough to find the fix that works that situation. Everything's so changing over the time scales that it's kind of ridiculous to think that there's a thing. For example, extrapolating the thing right out, which I like to do, about kind of deep futures. In just over 2 billion years, the Earth will be uninhabitable for any form of life. And in about several 100 million years, if humans last that long, it won't be inhabitable for human life. So where's the technological fix for that? We can maybe kind of avert small disasters or give some kind of palliative care during disasters using technology, but unless we kind of, the long-distance space travel is not going to happen. Moving the planet Earth is not going to happen. Building a shield against the sun is not going to happen. So, you know, we kind of have to accept it, really. Technology is never going to save us. Not now or not in the future.
And to reverse, Judy Bachman talked about that this kind of techie people thought first the technical solutions and then ask the social problems, because we should make it on the contrary, you know,
Yeah.
to ask first the social problems and then to find some kind of precarious answer supported on technology and, of course, on human relations and knowledge and.
Okay, perfect. No, yeah, for sure. And maybe you might want to add something about that.
Well, yeah, I
Israel?
think that one of the problems with the narrative of the technological fix is precisely the notion of technology. So it's one thing that we should also open up and try to problematize in the way that we normally assume in that question, if technology will save us, that technology is something very particular outside us and also a very particular kind of technology, very spectacular. And in the field of disasters, for instance, many of these expectations come from big data or other like big interventions, technological interventions with massive money and lots of infrastructure to try to solve a problem. But I think that we also have learned that technology is a very much everyday life kind of relationship, and it's part of society. We are part of that. I mean, it's a seamless web. It's very difficult to distinguish how we build society without technology. So in that sense, probably we have to reframe the question and try to understand to what extent technology is part of our life, of our solutions, part of our problems, of course. But I think we have to reframe a little bit the question and the role of technology and what we mean by technology. That would help.
Okay, so that would make a great end because we are right now on time. It's 19:25 right now, so I guess that we need to finish. No? So thanks a lot for all of you for being here. Thanks a lot for all your interventions, and thanks to all of you that you have made it available to come to here to this design hub, and also those that are there in the live streaming looking at us. So thanks a lot, and let's move to the next session. Thank you.